The year was 1872, and the plains had turned to dust. Dry wind moved across the grass like a whisper of death, rattling fence wire and carrying with it the sharp smell of sage and smoke. On a ranch tucked miles away from the nearest town, a man known only as Ezekiel Boone lived as though the world had ended long ago. He was a giant of a man, near 6.5 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and hard in every line of his frame. His hands were scarred from rope burns and fights, and his face bore the kind of deep creases that came not only from the sun, but from too many years without laughter. Folks in town said he had not touched a woman in 19 years, and those who said it added a note of fear to their voice, as though daring fate itself to stir his temper. Zeke Boone did not go looking for company, nor did he welcome it. His cattle were enough. The creak of leather, the thud of hooves, the moan of the wind, these were the sounds that kept him steady. When he did ride into town once every few months, people stepped aside. Some claimed he had killed a dozen men. Others said he had lost his soul to the war and come back, only half a man. Whatever the truth, Zeke carried silence around him like armor. That afternoon, he had just finished patching a broken fence post when he noticed movement at the far edge of the ranch road. He straightened slowly, squinting into the sun, one hand brushing instinctively over the worn handle of his revolver. 5 figures approached, small against the horizon, but growing clearer with each step. His pulse quickened. No rider would come on foot from that distance unless driven by desperation. The figures drew nearer. 5 girls, the oldest not yet 20, the youngest hardly more than a child. Their dresses were ragged, patched in places, and stained by travel. The eldest walked in front, shoulders squared though her boots looked near to falling apart. Her hair was pulled back in a tangle, her face smeared with dust, yet her eyes burned with something fierce. She carried herself like a mother wolf, though she could not have been more than 19. Zeke froze where he stood, his tall frame shadowing the fence post. The girls stopped a few yards short of him, as though aware that one wrong word might send him back into the silence. For a long moment, the only sound was the rasp of wind against dry weeds. Then the eldest spoke. "Sir, we seen your cows from a road. We can work. We can milk 'em. Just give us a chance to earn something to eat." Her voice wavered but never broke. Behind her, the younger girls clung to each other, their eyes darting between Zeke's towering form and the ranch house looming behind him. For the first time in 19 years, Ezekiel Boone did not know what to say. He had driven off drifters, thieves, and bounty hunters without hesitation. He had no patience for beggars, no interest in company. Yet the sight of those 5 girls, standing proud though half-starved, unsettled him in ways a bullet never could. He turned, spit into the dust, and growled low, "Ain't no charity here. Keep walking to—" The eldest girl didn't move. "We don't want charity. We'll work. Cows don't milk themselves." Zeke's jaw clenched. He could see the others behind her now. A girl of perhaps 16 with sharp cheekbones and eyes like flint. A younger one, no more than 12, her arms wrapped tight around a sack slung over her shoulder. The 2 youngest clung together, barely 10 and 8, faces hollow from hunger but shining with defiance. His chest tightened with something he had not felt in years, an ache that was neither anger nor pity, but a dangerous mix of both. "You'll find work elsewhere," he said, finally, voice flat. "Ain't safe here." The eldest narrowed her eyes. "Ain't safe nowhere." The words struck him like a hammer. He remembered war-torn towns, women crying in the rubble, his own heart torn out when Sarah with a smile that could melt iron, betrayed him with his own kin. He had left everything behind then. Love, family, trust. He had buried it in the dirt of this ranch and sworn never to look back. And now 5 girls were standing in front of him, too stubborn to turn away. He shook his head and stepped back. "One night, you sleep in the barn. At daybreak, you move on." The eldest gave a small nod. Relief softened her face, though her back remained stiff. The younger girls whispered prayers of thanks as they followed him toward the barn. Zeke walked in silence, his boots striking hard against the ground, his mind already arguing with itself. Inside, the barn smelled of hay, leather, and the faint musk of cattle. The girls settled quickly, huddling in the straw as though they had known barns all their lives. The eldest spread a thin blanket for the younger two and sat beside them, her gaze never leaving Zeke. He lit a lantern and stood by the door, arms crossed. "Name?" "Clara," the eldest said. "These are my sisters, May, Ruth, Elsie, and little Annie." Zeke grunted. Names made them real, and he didn't want them to be real. Real meant weight. Real meant responsibility. As night fell, coyotes began to howl across the plains. The sound carried sharp through the rafters, setting the youngest to trembling. Zeke remained still, his eyes narrowed on the shadows beyond the open barn door. He had learned long ago that predators came in more shapes than one. The girls tried to sleep, but the smallest whimpered. Clara held her tight, whispering low, "Shoo, Annie, it's just the night singing." Zeke looked away. He remembered a time when soft words had been spoken to him in the dark. That memory burned hotter than any fire. The coyotes drew closer, their cries turning wild. Zeke rose without a word, took up his rifle from the wall, and stepped into the night. The moon hung low, silvering the grass. Out beyond the corral, shadows moved. Coyotes, lean, hungry, bold enough to test the fence. Zeke raised the rifle. The crack of the shot split the night. One coyote dropped, the rest scattering into the dark. He lowered the rifle, his breath steady. Behind him, the barn door creaked open. Clara stood there, her face half lit by lantern glow. "You didn't have to," she said softly. He turned, eyes hard. "Coyotes tear calves apart. They'd do the same to you if they had the chance." She held his gaze for a long moment. There was no fear in her eyes, only gratitude, and something sharper he didn't want to name. Finally, she nodded and slipped back inside. Zeke stood under the stars a while longer, the weight of the rifle heavy in his hand. The wind tugged at his coat, carrying with it the faint sound of the girls whispering, their voices like a distant hymn. He had lived 19 years in silence, but tonight the silence was broken. When he finally stepped back into the barn, the girls were asleep, curled close together like pups. Clara sat awake against the wall, her head nodding but her eyes still fixed on him. He placed the rifle on the hook, stretched out in the opposite corner, and closed his eyes. Sleep did not come easy. His thoughts churned like a river in flood. Memories of betrayal, the strange defiance in Clara's eyes, the sound of small voices filling his empty barn. He had told himself he'd send them away at dawn. Yet, even as he lay there, he knew the truth was no longer so simple. Because sometimes fate didn't knock, it marched straight in, 5 strong, and demanded to be heard. And for the first time in 19 years, Ezekiel Boone wondered if his walls were not as unbreakable as he had believed. Morning broke harsh over the Boone ranch, a pale, yellow sun rising through smoke-colored clouds. The air smelled of dust and dry grass, and Ezekiel Boone woke with the weight of his promise heavy on his chest. He had sworn the 5 girls one night only, and now daylight left no excuse. His barn, once quiet, now held the soft breaths of strangers, and for a man who had spent 19 years guarding his solitude like a fortress, the intrusion felt like betrayal of his own oath. He rose stiffly, joints creaking, and studied them. Clara was the first to stir, lifting her head from where she had sat propped against the wall, eyes red but sharp as ever. She did not speak, only watched him as he gathered his hat and stepped outside. In her gaze, there was no plea, no begging, only the kind of stubbornness that forced him to look away. By the time he returned from watering the stock, the barn door was open and the girls were moving about with surprising purpose. May, the second eldest, was bent over a pail, hands clumsy but determined as she attempted to milk one of the cows. Ruth swept at the dust with a broken broom she must have found in the corner, her jaw set in fierce concentration. Elsie chased chickens that had escaped their pen, while little Annie laughed breathlessly, stumbling after her. The sound of that laugh cut Zeke in a way a bullet never could. It was alive, unafraid, piercing through the silence he had lived with so long. Clara came to him, brushing straw from her skirt. "We said we'd work, and we did." She gestured toward the cow, toward the eggs Elsie had managed to collect, toward Ruth bent over her task. "We ain't leaving, Mr. Boone." He studied her a long moment. She stood too proud for a girl who had nothing, pride like that got people killed. And yet, he could not deny the truth of her words. Already, the barn felt less empty, the air filled with the sound of hands and laughter instead of just wind. "You don't know what you're a skin," he said at last, his voice low as a growl. Clara crossed her arms. Better than starving on the road. He could have ordered them out, could have saddled his horse and driven them all back to the edge of his land. But something in her tone stopped him. The same steel he had once admired in men who held a line under fire. He turned away, muttering under his breath, and walked to the corral. He told himself it was temporary, just until he decided what to do. Yet when he looked back, Clara was smiling faintly, and that unsettled him worse than any enemy ever had. The days stretched into a week. The girls worked as though they had always belonged. May grew steady with the cows, her touch gentle but firm. Ruth proved quick with her hands, mending torn harness leather with surprising skill. Elsie and Annie brought life to the yard, chasing chickens and singing songs half-remembered from before their world had burned. And Clara was everywhere, her eyes sharp, her voice calm, carrying the weight of 5 lives with the strength of someone far older than her years. Zeke told himself he was no part of it, but he found his habits shifting. He lingered at the table longer, listening as the girls whispered stories over cornbread crumbs. He caught himself softening his stride so as not to startle them, caught himself setting an extra plate without thought. One evening, as Clara washed dishes in the basin, he noticed the way her hands shook when she thought no one was watching. That glimpse of fear hidden beneath all that fire cut through him, and he realized she carried burdens heavier than any man's. But just as the ranch began to feel alive again, trouble rode out of the horizon. It was near sundown when Zeke spotted dust trails to the east for riders moving fast. He stiffened, his hand falling to the revolver at his side. These were not neighbors. He had none within 30 miles, nor were they drifters. Their approach was too direct, their pace too bold. The riders reined up at the edge of his yard, faces shadowed by broad hats, rifles slung easy across their saddles. The leader, a wiry man with a scar cutting down his cheek, gave Zeke a crooked grin. "Boone," he called, "heard tell you got cattle fattening here. Heard you been keeping to yourself too long." Zeke stood tall, silent. The girls had gathered at the barn door, Clara's hand tight around Annie's shoulder. He could feel their eyes on his back. The scarred man's grin widened. "Word is, you ain't the fighter you once was. Figured we'd lighten your load before winter?" The old rage stirred in Zeke's chest, the fire he had spent 19 years burying. He stepped forward, his voice a low rumble. "You'll find no welcome here." The man laughed, a hard, empty sound. "Didn't come for welcome. Came for cows. And maybe more if you're keeping things hid in that barn." His eyes slid toward the girls. The air snapped taut. Zeke's hand hovered near his revolver. For a heartbeat, he saw the war again. Men shouting, smoke burning his throat, the face of his brother beside Sarah in the firelight. Betrayal, rage, blood. He would not live it again. "You ride on," he said, voice cold enough to cut glass. The scarred man studied him, then spat in the dust. "We'll be back. Cows or coin. Your choice." With a jerk of his reins, he turned, the others following. Their laughter carried on the wind long after they disappeared into the horizon. The girls rushed to Zeke, fear etched in every face. Clara stepped forward. "We can't stay. They'll come back." Zeke shook his head. "This is my land. My fight. You'll be outnumbered," she pressed. "They'll burn everything." He met her eyes, the fire in the match by his own. Let him try. That night, Zeke sat alone on the porch, rifle across his knees. The stars burned cold above him, the land stretching dark and silent all around. Inside, he could hear the girls whispering, their voices weaving together like threads of hope. He had lived too long in silence. Now, every sound was a reminder of what he stood to lose. Sleep came in short bursts, haunted by memories. He saw Sarah again, saw her smile, saw her hand on his brother's arm. He remembered the gun in his own hand, the blood on the floor, the vow he made to shut himself off forever. He woke with sweat on his brow and the taste of ashes in his mouth. At dawn, Clara found him still on the porch. She set a tin cup of coffee beside him. "You can't do it alone," she said softly. He didn't look at her. "Been doing it alone 19 years. Her voice sharpened. "And what's it brought you? An empty house? A heart locked up like a prison? You think being alone keeps you safe, but it don't. It just makes dying easier." The words struck deeper than any bullet. He turned to her then, meeting her steady gaze. She was young, but her eyes held storms he recognized: loss, hunger, fire. She reminded him of himself once, before bitterness had hardened him. "Go back to town," he said, though the words felt hollow. "Find safety there." Clara shook her head. "We got no town. No one wants us. Here's the first place we've been treated like more than burdens. You send us away, we die on the road." Zeke looked away, jaw tight. He had not asked for this. He had not asked for 5 girls to walk into his life, to tear down the walls he had built. Yet fate had delivered them. And now he could not send them back into the dust. The days that followed were thick with unease. Zeke taught May how to load a rifle, showed Ruth where to fetch water from the well. Elsie and Annie gathered wood, their laughter a thin shield against the fear creeping closer. Clara walked beside him, silent more often than not, but her presence heavy with expectation. He knew she waited for him to admit it, that he had already chosen. And still, the raiders did not return. Not yet. The waiting was worse than the fight. Each night, Zeke patrolled the fence line, the moon casting long shadows. Each day, he watched the horizon for dust trails, his hand never far from his gun. One evening, as the sun bled red over the hills, he stood at the corral and felt Clara come to his side. She did not speak at first. They watched the cattle shift, and lo, the sky burning down to embers. "You can't guard everything forever," she said finally. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "That's all a man can do." She studied him, her voice quiet. "No, a man can build. He can protect, yes, but he can also choose to let others in. You think we're your burden, but maybe we're your chance." Zeke turned sharply, her words striking harder than he wanted to admit. He opened his mouth to answer, but the sound of hoofbeats cut through the dusk. Both froze, eyes snapping toward the horizon. Dust rose in the distance. The riders were coming back. Clara's hand went to her sister's, gathering them close. Zeke lifted his rifle, his heart thundering with a mix of rage and something he had thought long buried. Fear not for himself, but for those who depended on him. The storm he had dreaded was here, and for the first time in 19 years, he knew he could not face it alone. The hoofbeats rolled closer, a drumbeat on the hard earth, until the sound filled every corner of the Boone Ranch. Dust rose behind the riders like a storm cloud, the dying sun painting them in blood-red light. Ezekiel Boone stood in the yard, rifle gripped in both hands, his shadow long across the ground. Clara was at his back, her sisters huddled close to her skirt, eyes wide with the kind of fear children should never have to carry. "They've come," Clara whispered. Zeke's jaw tightened. "Stay inside." She shook her head. "We stay together." The raiders drew up hard, 5 of them this time, more than before. The scarred man rode in front, his grin wide, his teeth yellow in the fading light. He carried a rifle across his saddle and a cruel confidence in the set of his shoulders. "Told you we'd be back, Boone," he called. "And you didn't make it easy for us, so now it costs more. Cattle, supplies, girls, all of it." The words struck like a lash. Clara stepped forward, fury flashing in her eyes, but Zeke raised his arm, barring her back. His voice came low, deep as thunder. "You'll get nothing here but lead." The raiders laughed. The scarred man spat in the dirt. "Old fool. Ain't no one to help you. No law out here. Just men with the grit to take what they want." "Then step closer," Zeke growled. The first shot cracked through the yard before the words had even settled. Zeke's rifle roared. the bullet striking the dirt at the lead rider's horse, sending the beast rearing. Chaos broke loose. The raiders fired back, bullets tearing through the corral rails, splinters flying. The cattle bellowed, thrashing in fear. The girls screamed, ducking behind the barn wall. Zeke moved like a man possessed, firing, reloading, firing again. Each shot was precise, born from years of battle. One raider toppled from his saddle, with a curse clutching his shoulder. Another wheeled his horse wide, circling to flank. "Clara!" Zeke barked. "Water! Get buckets! Keep the barn from catching." Smoke was already curling from a torch hurled onto the roof. Clara seized a bucket, shouting to May and Ruth. Together, the girls formed a frantic line, throwing water on the fire, their small bodies moving with desperate speed. Elsie and Annie clung to each other, but even they fetched wood, feeding the flames of courage instead of fear. The scarred man dismounted, crouching behind his horse for cover. His rifle barked again, the bullet grazing Zeke's arm. Pain burned through muscle, but Zeke barely flinched. He had bled before, and he would bleed again. His world narrowed to the yard, the barn, the girls' voices crying out behind him. He would not let them fall. Another shot rang, sharper, closer. Zeke staggered, the impact slamming into his side. He fell to one knee, breath ripping from his lungs. Clara screamed his name, dropping her bucket, rushing to him. He forced himself up, teeth clenched against the fire in his ribs. "Back," he growled. "Don't you dare come closer." But she was already at his side, pressing her hands to the wound, eyes blazing. "You can't do this alone. You'll die." He looked at her then, truly looked, at the dirt streaking her face, the tears she would not let fall, the steel in her gaze that mirrored his own once upon a time. And for the first time in 19 years, he allowed himself the truth. He was not alone. He could not be alone anymore. His hand closed over hers, rough and trembling. "Then we fight together." The raiders pressed harder, circling, firing into the windows of the ranch house, bullets shattering glass. Smoke poured from the barn roof despite the girls' efforts, flames licking higher. The cattle broke free, thundering through the yard, scattering men and horses alike. Zeke staggered to his feet, Clara's shoulder under his arm. He fired again, dropping another raider from the saddle. The man hit the dirt hard, rifle clattering away. Ruth seized it before he could rise, her hands shaking but steady enough to aim. The crack of her shot split the air, and the raider fell still. The scarred man cursed, fury twisting his features. "Kill them all," he shouted. Bullets whined past. Annie cried out as a splinter cut her cheek, but she did not falter. Elsie pulled her behind the water trough, shielding her small body with her own. Clara knelt, loading Zeke's spare revolver, pressing it into his hand. Their eyes locked for a heartbeat, an unspoken vow passing between them. Zeke rose again, tall despite the blood soaking his shirt. He advanced, step by step, gun steady, firing with the cold precision of a man who had nothing left to lose. The raiders faltered under his fury. Even wounded, Ezekiel Boone was a storm no man could weather. But the scarred man held his ground, snarling like a wolf. He aimed true and fired. The bullet struck Zeke square in the chest, driving him back. He stumbled, the world spinning, and fell hard to the dirt. "No!" Clara screamed. She threw herself over him, shielding him with her body. Bullets whistled past, but she did not move. Her voice rose, fierce and trembling. "You can't take him. You can't take what's ours." The youngest girls cried out, their small hands clutching each other. May seized the fallen rifle, Ruth beside her. Together, with eyes blazing, they fired at the raiders. One man dropped, another wheeled his horse and fled. Panic spread through their ranks. The scarred man cursed, leveling his rifle again. But before he could fire, Zeke's hand rose, bloody but unshaking. His revolver barked one last time. The bullet struck true, slamming into the raider's chest. The man staggered, eyes wide with shock, then fell into the dust, his body still. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of flames and the harsh breaths of the living. The remaining raiders fled, their horses kicking up dust as they vanished into the horizon. Clara bent low over Zeke, pressing her hands to his chest, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. "Stay with me. Please don't leave." His eyes fluttered, the weight of 19 years pressing heavy. Yet through the haze of pain, he saw them all, 5 girls, battered but unbroken, standing around him like a circle of fire. For them he had fought. For them he had bled. And in them, he had found something he thought forever lost. His voice came rough, barely a whisper. "Don't leave me." Clara pressed her forehead to his, whispering fierce promises. "Never. You're ours now. We're yours." The flames consumed the barn, but the girls saved what they could. They dragged water buckets through wet blankets, fought with every ounce of strength. Together, they kept the fire from spreading to the house. Together, they endured. Hours later, when the stars burned cold above and the smoke had thinned, Zeke lay in bed, his wounds bound. The girls hovered near, tending him with a care that humbled him. Clara sat at his side, her hand never leaving his. Days turned to weeks. Zeke healed slowly, his strength returning with every sunrise. The barn was rebuilt plank by plank, the girls working beside him, their laughter rising like music against the hammer's ring. The ranch that had once been a tomb now lived again, filled with voices and warmth. Zeke found himself smiling, small at first, then fuller, though he scarcely recognized the sound of his own laughter when it came. He watched May grow deft with the cattle, Ruth sharp with a rifle, Elsie quick with her hands, Annie bright with joy. And Clara, always Clara, was the flame that held them all together, her courage burning steady beside his own. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky glowed gold, Zeke stood with Clara at the edge of the corral. The cattle moved slow and easy, the girls' laughter carrying on the breeze. Zeke breathed deep, the scent of hay and smoke and life filling him. He turned to Clara, his voice quiet but sure. 19 years, I thought I was done. Thought there was nothing left but ghosts. But you 5, you gave me back more than I knew I'd lost." Clara's eyes shone, fierce and soft all at once. "We didn't give you anything. You chose to fight. You chose to stay." He looked out over the ranch, the land that had once been only dust and silence. Now it was alive. Now it was home. He reached down, taking her hand in his. His grip was strong, steady, a promise written not in words but in the blood and fire they had survived. And for the first time in 19 years, Ezekiel Boone was not alone. The narrator's voice rose over the scene, steady and reflective, carrying the weight of the tale to those who would hear. They say the West was built by men with guns and women with grit. But maybe the truth runs deeper. Maybe the hardest frontier is not the land, but the walls we build inside ourselves. Zeke Boone learned that when 5 girls came asking for milk, and he gave them something far greater, a home. The voice lingered a moment, drawing the listener close. If the story of blood, fire, and redemption stirred you, don't forget to share it, speak it, pass it on. For the frontier was never just a place. It was a test of the heart, and some men, given a second chance, rose like giants. And so the story closed with a ranch alive again, a family forged in fire, and a man reborn from silence into the noise of love.